Hi everyone, this is Julie Bruns. Welcome to the Peace and Possibilities podcast. I want you to thrive and be happy, peaceful, and content, no matter where you are on your journey. This podcast shares stories that will show you how it can be done, no matter what your circumstances. You'll be inspired and come away with a new spark of an idea. Never forget, anything is possible. New episodes are released every Wednesday. Subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. This helps others find our content and get happier sooner. To possibility and beyond. So welcome to this episode of the Peace and Possibilities podcast. Rob, tell me how to say your last name.
Stainland,
that's what I thought. Okay. So Rob Stainland's story, from what I know, which is not a lot, and why I reached out to you, we went to the same high school. I graduated several years before you, and turns out you know one of my younger sisters. And I read about Rob's story in one of the school newsletters recently, how he was working in science and I think pharmacology at Purdue University. And I was reading a little bit about you, and I clicked on the story and read that you were working in one area of medicine and science and shifted to do something else to help with the COVID-19 viruses that's going on right now on our planet. And I thought, this is so cool. I was inspired by your story because you were saying you are passionate about helping people and that you wanted to do something to make a difference right now, more than ever, obviously, to help solve this problem. And I thought, you know what, that's someone I'd like to talk to, because you're taking what you love, sounds like it's science, and then shifting it so that you can, I guess science in general, whether you're using it to solve a major problem like we have right now, or just your life in general, you're trying to come up with cures or increase the benefit to people's lives in some regard with science, I would say. Either way, it's a cool pursuit. Totally unfamiliar to me because it's not, my brain doesn't go to science and all of the, it's overwhelming to me when I think about science and math. So I'm always inspired by people that are into it and using it to make this planet a better place, little by little. So thanks for joining me, and that's what I know about you. So I'm curious to hear more about how you got into what you're doing now, and if indeed everything I said is accurate, tell me more about, how you started growing up, if you knew you wanted to study what you're studying now, and then how that changed morphed into what it's become for this pandemic we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, so thanks so much for contacting me and having me on. And indeed, I did really start my laboratory research as a professor on other viruses and research systems, mostly geared towards how viruses replicate in human cells. But I got my start out at Willowbrook High School, as you mentioned. I grew up in Lombard and went through the District 45, and then, of course, Willowbrook High School. And I think in junior high and in high schools, when I really started to pay attention to science, I had an interest in medicine, or getting into some aspect of medicine as a career. And I think as I learned through high school a little bit more about biology and physics, and really how cells work in our body, or animals or plants, that really got me interested in thinking more at the molecular level than perhaps helping a patient, more at the organ level, or just kind of diagnosing diseases. I was really interested in what's going on at the subcellular level. So I decided, once I graduated Willowbrook, I went to University of Illinois Chicago, and I majored in biochemistry. And there I focused really on metabolism and how cells make energy, or a molecule called ATP that's needed for cells and life to exist. So I really started thinking then in the college years about, how these enzymes in our body work and how they can be regulated. If we think of diseases like diabetes or cancer, these types of diseases all really have some metabolic component. Some people may have heard of things such as the cancer cell really being in a state where it can't undergo programmed cell death or kill itself like a normal healthy cell would when things went awry. So the metabolic components really help these cells survive. And as I matured through the undergraduate curriculum and research, I started looking at graduate schools, and that's where I decided to pursue a PhD where I focus mostly on chemistry and biochemistry of human cells and how they function at this, what's called lipid signaling and lipid metabolism. But all that really, I think, was sparked from a young age. My mother passed away of cancer when I was a freshman at Willowbrook, so that, I think, was also a driving factor in really motivating me to do things that could help people or other scientists, or eventually things that could be translated to the clinic to help diagnose disease or treat diseases. So as I progressed through my graduate studies, I eventually became a professor at Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, and IU School of Medicine, South Bend. And I was there as a professor from 2006 to 2017. And then in 2017, I actually moved to here at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And this has just been a little bit better research environment for viruses. At Notre Dame, very strong research, but I was one of the only people really doing virus research. But at Purdue, there's quite a few more virologists. So until really,
that's first of all, that's a term I've never heard. So so yeah, what you're saying is pretty cool, and you're using terms that I've never heard before, like virologists. I didn't even realize it was people that just study viruses. So that in itself is pretty cool. Were you so I'm sorry to hear about your mom. So you were, when you were 14 years old and your mom is sick. And before you were 14 and she was sick, were you already one of those kids who was science was interesting to you, or did you not get into it and really get interested in it until high school and decided to pursue it after your mom got sick? Or was it like you always had a propensity for it? I'm just curious.
I did have some propensity for science and medicine. I can't tell you what grade. My dad gave me like a microscope, to start looking at some slides. And my parents didn't even graduate high school. So my mom was a housewife and my dad owned a construction company. So neither one of them was really into science, or even really, I would say, schooling for the most part. So I don't know where the early love came from. So I tried to balance love of sports and love of science as a kid, I guess, and of course playing with friends. But I always had some drive to do something in science or medicine from, at least, let's say, 4th or 5th grade.
Huh. That's so cool. So there was this innate, because sometimes I talk to people and they'll say, well, my parents were always around, they were entrepreneurs and they were always experimenting with different businesses and creativity. And that's how I got it. And other people will say, like you said, I didn't have any of whatever I'm interested in now in my background. I'm not even sure where it came from. Like, your dad gave you this microscope. And even that is kind of bizarre. If he was in construction and your mom's a housewife, it's like you don't see a microscope in a construction, whether they own a company or not. That's not something that typically goes in sync with that. So even that's pretty cool, that maybe he just knew that you were interested and was like, I'll give him this and see where it goes. And it's just it's so interesting how things come about. And it sounds like they were definitely observant parents, because for him he must have just had some inkling that would be that would be something that's awesome. I love hearing stories about parents like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're at Purdue and you are studying viruses, which is called virology. Did you say?
Yes.
Okay, and so you're there and you've been there for a couple of years, and you were at Notre Dame for a long time, and you decided. So did you have to shift? Were you were already studying viruses when all of this happened, or did you have to shift?
Yeah. So when the SARS-CoV-2, the causative agent of COVID-19, came about, we didn't have to do much to change. We've been working on Ebola virus, which a lot of people may have heard of, and some other of these nasty viruses. So we really just had a shift to the viral components from this new virus causing COVID-19. So really for us, the people in the lab were well versed in the different techniques and assays we'd have to use and run. So we were able to shift pretty rapidly. The biggest challenge, of course, was changes to the social distancing and things. So we obviously had to be very careful of the amount of people in certain spaces and rotating time with the different instruments and those types of things that normally we wouldn't have to worry about.
So you're still doing the same work you were doing before, you just had to start doing it a little differently and change your focus a little bit.
Correct.
Okay. So what exactly, what you're doing now is specifically like in a in layman's term for the audiences that aren't as
Mhm.
familiar with, the people aren't as familiar with scientific jargon, what are you doing now to help with the cure or to get information about this so that we can
Mhm.
be better suited to attack it?
So we're studying, some people may have heard this term viral shedding. If you read the general news articles or watch the reports, you'll hear about a lot about spread of the virus. How does it get from one individual to the next, or how does it really replicate or spread from cell to cell, especially in the lung or respiratory tract? So what we're trying to determine first is, how does the virus spread from cell to cell? That's something we had been doing for these other viruses before, so we could take the current microscopes and assays we had and just adapt them to this new SARS-CoV-2 virus. And really the long-term goals, but in this case, the long-term goal becomes maybe a goal of 2 or 3 months, is, are there ways we can slow down the shedding or the spread? Viruses, you don't necessarily need a drug to completely block it all at once. If you have drug therapy that can slow it down, one, you can really reduce the spread from person to person, but you can reduce the spread within an individual so their symptoms aren't as severe, or perhaps they may not even get sick if you have drugs that can be given as a prophylactic agent to prevent them from ever getting symptoms. So our goal here is to use this viral shedding mechanism to really just block the virus spread from cell to cell.
Oh, so are people like you in universities all over the country and the world doing similar work, or is it just it's do they say they? I don't even know. The government says, hey, you people in Indiana, you work on this, and you people in Illinois work on this, or is it just like if you're in a university that already has people working on viruses, go ahead and change your focus now?
Mhm.
I have no idea. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, the good thing is, we're kind of, even though we're professors in labs, universities, we're really entrepreneurs. We really get to pursue the questions we want in the science projects. So, nobody said, there's other faculty or people who are like, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to focus on this virus? But nobody tells us what to do. We started really going with our own hypotheses based on the data that was emerging, internationally and now in the US, to what some of the mechanisms of the spread could be. Now, the government encourages people to work on it by giving grants, but they're not they're not free. You have to write a proposal and have it reviewed, and not every proposal gets funded. So the way we get funding for this is, now there's been some emergency funds from the National Institutes of Health, and our grants are pending on that. We hope some of those will be funded soon to help pay for the supplies and the personnel, time and employment, really, to do the research.
It's so cool. I'd never thought about it before. It's so cool that you can actually work in this field and still be like an entrepreneur, where you get to just decide what you're going to focus your attention and energy on, and what questions you want to have answered. Which is, it's really cool to think about it like that, instead of saying, "Oh, you work for us, and we're going to tell you what to study." It's like it's just a cool component I'd never thought of before.
Yes.
Very
I mean, I
cool.
will say that the people in my lab, they have to listen for the most part to what I ask them or tell them, I guess. So the people who are training, getting their PhD, or they're doing a postdoc to eventually become a faculty, I guess those are the ones who are following more of the directive of the professor or the principal investigators.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay, having a long career at Notre Dame and then being here at Purdue University now, that's a pretty substantial career in this work. What would you say made you successful pursuing that education? Because obviously, getting a PhD is a big, big commitment. I know one of my sisters has one. It's a, it's a major commitment, I congratulate you for that. What do you think made you successful? Number one, pursuing that education, and then getting a really good job doing what you're doing now, because that can't be an easy thing too, even with your PhD.
Right. No, it isn't. I think first, having supportive family members who are at least cognizant of what your dreams or interests are for your career, and kind of giving you the support to say, all right, yeah, a PhD takes time. it also is a time where obviously you have an income as a graduate student in science. You get something called a stipend, but it's not very high. So some people need, extra support from their family at some time. So I think that was one. I think picking a PhD in the laboratory you enter as a student, who your mentor is, makes a big difference. And my mentor was always very supportive of me, of creating new projects and new areas of research in his lab. So I really have to give a lot of credit to the mentor for helping groom me into a independent scientist. And then, I had a laser focus, I would say, from early on, from going to college, just to really be all in to the biochemistry and the details of what was going on in research. But a story I always like to share with new trainees and students in the lab: this doesn't mean you don't get to have fun or have a life. You have to maintain a social balance. You have to exercise, and sleep well and eat well. Those types of things, I think, are always important, whether you're training as a student or as an undergrad, a PhD student, or as you get into your career. So I think, luckily I was in places at University of Illinois Chicago and then the suburbs of Chicago where I had the ability to fulfill, these other social and health obligations in addition to training on being a PhD scientist.
So glad you mentioned those, because I think depending on what realm you're in, and I just mean like in the world of science, art, music, corporate business, whatever it is, it's so nice to hear that you're so, because to me it's such a foreign concept, science, just in general. I've been in the corporate world for a long time in learning and development, so education and teaching and software. But if I look at a PhD candidate or a scientist or a doctor or someone who's just studying anything medicine related, I think what a commitment and how focused they need to be. But I'm not thinking about how that person is socially balanced and getting enough sleep and exercising. And I'm just thinking that they have laser focus and that they're really committed to finishing what they started because they want to help other people. But you're right, if you can't have all those things with the focus and the creativity and the passion and drive, if you don't have the balance of this physical and mental health, you just can't. You can do it for a little bit of time, but
Mm-hmm.
and you might be successful for a little bit of time, but you're not going to be successful over the long haul, and you certainly aren't going to be healthy mentally or physically. So I'm so
Mm-hmm.
glad to hear you mention that. I'm glad. Thank you.
No problem. I mean, in grad school, I will say I probably slept 5 to 6 hours for 4 to 5 years, but it didn't phase me. But as I got into my 30s, then I really had to adapt. I was always exercising, but I had to really adapt sleep as I got a little bit older, because you're right. There's periods of time you can do it and do it effectively, but eventually it catches up with you.
Yeah, and when you're young, you think that is going to last forever, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
until you reach some plateau or say, "Oh, I'm not feeling so good." You're like, "Wait a minute, I can't sustain this," and I didn't know I couldn't because I was young and I just thought it was going to be forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what do you say as far as making you happy and peaceful along the way? So keeping enough of that, so you have the social balance and you have the exercise and the sleep. But what made you continue to pursue? Because that's a long-term commitment to say, I'm going to go to college and then I'm going to get a PhD and then I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to try to find this job and then I'm going to study all of these elements in science, all of these years. What kept you happy and peaceful along the way? Was it some of that balancing, or were there other things that came along that you weren't even thinking about when you were in your 20s?
Yeah, I think the balance was one. I still played a lot of recreational sports then, hockey, and sometimes there was this flag football league I was in for a while. That was helpful. And then, of course, I met my future wife along the way in the later period of graduate school. So I think that also helped find a little bit more meaning than just, being a friend and a brother and a son and a scientist. So that gave a little bit more, I think, career planning and hope for the future, that as I became an independent scientist and professor, that, that wouldn't be the only thing I'd be doing, that I'd be able to start a family and have a strong relationship as well.
Yeah, it's because it's no matter what your passion is, if you don't have someone to share it with, or you're not focused on things other than yourself or your work, and you don't have that balance, life is going to seem pretty unfulfilling. I think
Yeah.
no matter what you're studying, yeah, it's cool. So what would you say, What would you say to someone? So my son Sam is graduating from Willowbrook this year. My older
Mhm.
son already graduated in Willowbrook and at college last year. What would you say to men or women at that age, and even in their 30s that have shifted careers, or even now when they want to have to change up something because of the way the economy is? What would you say to people that are searching for something meaningful to do and use their strengths while they're doing it? What would you say to those people if they were looking for
Right. Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned is this book and then some theory written by some psychologists later on, this book by Viktor Frankl and his Man's Search for Meaning. So he survived the Holocaust camps, but one of the things he found is really just that there are such purpose in people being actualized, meaning, whether you're digging a ditch or, you're working on a science project or you're doing homework for your school, there's always meaning you can find in all these events, how minuscule they may be. So I think, despite people having hard times finding a job or career, eventually it probably will come. They might need to explore different options, talk to people, get mentors in different disciplines who are willing to give them feedback and perhaps just some guidance on careers, and really hope to utilize their strengths for what they find to be meaningful. So I think for me, at least, most of the people I've mentored eventually went on to good jobs, but even getting their PhD, many of them struggled with what they really wanted to do. I said to them, you could go and become a postdoc and then eventually a professor, but they didn't really want to do that, which is great. They identified that, but they just needed a little more time and exploration of alternative careers with a PhD in science. And for those purposes, they often would need feedback from people, in other parts of business or the corporate world to give them feedback on how their PhD could be utilized to help others.
I love that. It's so true, and it's not something that you think about. I mean, us further along in our careers, but when we're 15 or 20 or 25, and I tell my kids this all the time. It's like asking questions from other people that are either doing what you want to do or made mistakes along the way. But you don't think about getting feedback, or brainstorming with other people. You just think, I'm going to get my PhD and then I'll go get a job as a professor. I'm going to get my PhD and I'm going to study this a little bit more. Like you said, along the way, if you're not exploring different options and you're not asking for feedback and you're not brainstorming with people, you wouldn't know about those other avenues. Oh, I don't want to be a professor. Okay, well, what do you want to do with your PhD? Oh, you
Mm-hmm.
can do this and this. Oh, I had never thought about that before. And if you're not having that conversation with people, you're really laser focused. You may miss an opportunity that you really would have been good for, that your strengths would have been a perfect fit for, but because you only had that laser focus or that one option and weren't exploring anything else, you missed it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So important. That's great advice. And I love that book. I read that book by Viktor Frankl several years ago, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, for someone to come out of that situation of the Holocaust and still have compassion for other people and making the best of the choices that were there. I think I remember one story was when he had food or bread or soup or something. He was sharing it with someone who was on their deathbed. I mean, they were all, they were all suffering, but he was suffering more. And I think he was sharing
Mm-hmm.
something with someone, and he didn't have to be doing that. He could have just been looking out for himself, but just finding the meaning and having compassion and helping other people, no matter what your circumstance is. If he can do that in that circumstance, there's no excuse for us not to be doing the same thing with all of the privilege and the opportunities we have, for sure.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that book. Okay, so I have one final question for you, Rob. What do you wish you had learned earlier in your life or career? So it's not so much about regrets. It's just like, gosh, I wish that lesson would have come a little bit sooner and I could
Mm-hmm.
have grown differently or faster or something.
Yeah, I would definitely say for me, I wish I appreciated the value of people, relationships, and connections earlier on. I certainly always had, friends and connections, but I was so focused, leaving high school at Willowbrook, going to college, and then from college to grad school on kind of just my path. And I lost a lot of connections and people. Now I've made many along the way ever since, but I think, like you said with the Viktor Frankl, you don't want to be doing things for selfish reasons, but by having connections and people, one, you have a social network, and there's studies showing how protective this is for mental health. But two, you just have people, who can help connect you and to other places or other people they know. So that's one thing, I advise to anyone, no matter what stage of their career, is really not to forget about the value of people, whether they're above you or below you in your profession. Just relationships that you make along the way can be important.
I love that. I love that you see that now, and I love that. Do you think that it's more of a men's, that's something that men do more? And I'm just thinking about with my boys and with my husband. Do you think it's more I just think women in general are not just stereotype. I just think in general we're more nurturing and we connect easier with people, and men are taught more, okay, you have to focus on this and then get that, and just kind of big picture thing. Do you think that has anything to do with it, or you just think it was more your personality? I'm just curious. I hadn't thought about that till you said that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, anecdotally, I think certainly from what I've observed from men I know, right, that it's more prone to happen in men than women. I don't have any data to prove it, but I've seen it. So I think that's part of it. And then part of it was me just, really thinking about what I needed to do, get to UIC, to college, get from college to graduate school, and kind of just losing track of people and connections along the way. Never burn any bridges or anything bad, just not kind of connecting and keeping those relationships that were started early on in life.
Yeah, and I think I don't think some people value those more just simply because they need them. Like, I'm one of the people that's valuing them, but it's not because I think that I need them more, or they're going to benefit me later. It's just always something that has been at the forefront for me personally. I grew up in a big family, and I don't necessarily think that everyone in my family is the same. That's just always been my thought. Like, friends, my social circle was a big part of, even I can remember being 10 years old and it being a big deal for me. So I'm not saying it's men less than women. I just think there's some women that's not as important, and they're more introverted, and those social connections aren't as often and as important. So I think it's definitely a personal thing, but I do want to hone in on the fact that no matter what you are, male, female, young, old, introvert, extrovert, those connections to people, and I mean, sincere, just, a stranger you can have a connection with that's sincere, someone you never talk to again, but every little connection you have, whether it's with someone from the opposite sex or someone, like you said, above you in a position or below you, those little moments can be impactful, even if you never see that person again, but also especially those nurturing those and maintaining important relationships along the way. They're going to benefit you over the years and for a long time. But even the little ones that you have no idea about will end up benefiting you or that other person. So you just never know with connection. That's what I love about them.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you, Rob. This has been an interesting conversation. I love hearing from people from different areas and experiences, and I've never interviewed a scientist before, so this has been really cool. And I want to commend you on your willingness to help with everything that's going on in our world today, because obviously the more people that are focusing on how we can fix it and the solution, the faster we're going to get there. Would you agree?
That's right. I think so. When people come together, collaborate, and really try to solve these challenging problems, one, we can, of course, hopefully treat this disease, but slow the spread and prevent it, but create new ways, where there might be less chance of this occurring again in the same way, so we don't have economic damages as well.
I know, I definitely agree. One more final question, the final one. Do you get up with a new determination every day now, or is it something like, because you have this looming in our world, we have this looming desire and we have this looming big problem for everyone to solve. Do you have more resolve to be like, this is more focus, I guess is the best way of putting it. Do you find that more now, or is it just kind of like you've always been a scientist and it's always something that's been important to you, so you just do more of the same? Just curious.
No, I would say definitely, even though in science we work hard and are focused on important problems here, this is a game changer. I mean, normally we're going to be distracted by meetings, seminars, teaching, more social events in the workplace and things like that. And obviously these things all went away except teaching's online now, went away because of the circumstances, but this really was a motivator because of the situation, I think, to really, I would say, increase focus more than twofold, probably 4 to 5-fold, to just really impact the nature of what the virus is doing to human cells and how it's spreading.
Well, I'm sure I can send all of the thanks from the people that are going to be listening to this too, because the more people like you that are focusing on it, the quicker we're going to come to a solution, and we'll be able to get back to our normal or our new normal sooner rather than later. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your time and reaching out to me.
Yeah, I'm so glad I read your story, and I hope that more people can learn about all of these ways that there's people just like you all over our country, especially doing things to help us along every day, even if you're not like the doctor or nurse is actually treating people. There's people behind the scenes trying to come up with ways to solve this problem, and I'm so thankful for it. So thank you.
No problem.
Thanks for listening. If you love this content, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you found us on. You can get all my social media links in the description below. Help us keep the momentum going so that every person can live their lives happily, doing work they love.